Hey, Paul. How's everybody doing? We're going to talk about Yale. We're going to talk about Gaza. This is Harkness Tower at Yale. We're going to talk about Donald Kagan, a fairly well-known professor, and his son, Robert Kagan, who's married to Victoria Nuland. And Professor Kagan taught Greek history, hence Achilles' Last Stand. Plus, I like this song. You can't see. So Professor Kagan is what made me do this is, like, I talk about Victoria Nuland all the time. I make fun of her because she had this title from Yale, the Distinguished Practitioner of Grand Strategy. Okay, so we'll start on that, and it's sort of fun to like beat people up when they're down, when their policies are a complete disaster. But first, we got to hear this solo. So I'm going through like old boxes of books and memorabilia, and like there's a picture over there of me playing rugby when I was 16 years old on a men's club here in Western Pennsylvania, and I was like terrified. Here, I'll get it. Hold on. So that guy right there is an absolutely fucking terrified 16-year-old wing for the Westmoreland Rugby Football Club here in Westmoreland County. I'm not in Westmoreland County, it's right over the hill. And these guys are like 30 years old, and like I'm terrified and running for my fucking life. So that was that. I found that. And then I found this outline to the freshman assembly for the class of 1993 at Yale. And I remembered that it was Donald Kagan. Again, he's the father-in-law of Victoria Nuland. She's the famous person who has destroyed the Ukraine. I mean, like literally millions of people are dead and displaced. It's not all because of Victoria Nuland, but she led the charge. And I want to sketch this out for you, how the Ivy League, the Ivory Tower gets connected to these ethnic cleansings, and the most Ukraine is an ethnic cleansing as well. But if you look at everything that's going on right now, believe it or not, it all comes back to the people of the New American Century. Co-founder is Victoria Nuland's husband, who is Donald Kagan's son, Robert Kagan. So I want to unpack a bunch of this shit for you. I know this is a little, I lost some followers over the weekend because I did a deep dive in AI and like said that these AI systems have cult-like behavior. Well, I'm not changing the way I'm not becoming Tucker Carlson, people, okay? We're not going to get like more dilute so I get more followers. We're going to get more intense, okay? Because I've been telling you that Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson and all these people are a fucking joke. And over the weekend, we all learned that Tucker Carlson should probably stand up and announce whether or not he's a CIA agent. I don't know that he is. I don't know that he's not. He's on both sides of whether or not his father is. And Nick Fuentes called him out on that. So I'm calling out Yale. I'm calling out the Coggin family. I'm calling out Victoria Newland. I'm calling out Victoria Newland's sister, who runs the Institute for the Study of War. Fuck Marty when it comes to the Institute of War. What she does is raises money and pays off generals to go on TV and lie. And this is all connected to Yale University, my alma mater. This is why I have this old hat on. Okay? So I thought about this. My dad, like once every 5 years, will tell the story of going. So you know how this works, a freshman assembly. You get there, you unload your shit, like you move in, your mom and dad are with you, you go out to lunch, and then at 4 p.m. you go into the big fancy Woolsey Hall, which is in the what's called Freshman Commons, if I remember right. And the guy who introduces you to Yale University, of course, the university organist plays something from Bach, the Fantasy in G major. There's an invocation by Harry Adams. I have a funny story about him. And then Donald Kagan, after there's a hymn, and the words are recited by Henry Adams, the university chaplain. And then the address was from Donald Kagan. And then we had sort of a welcome from the president of the university. I know this is all a little dry, but just go with it, because we're gonna sink some teeth into this, okay? So my dad would point out periodically, I don't know, talking about politics or something, he remembers the line from Donald Kagan, who said, we're not going to tell your children, we're not going to tell your, I don't know if he said children. Did he say children? Something like, we're going to tell these students or something like that, not what to think, but how to think. And my dad never graduated from college. He did go to college, but he didn't ever graduate. And he would remark very frequently, and I think he's right, he says that's more dangerous than telling them what to think. So just digest that for a minute. Donald Kagan has this very polemic way of speaking. Like if you go to a Shakespeare class or a history class, or who's the famous guy from the South, Shelby Foote, who's has a deep Southern accent, and he talks about the Civil War, and he's very empathetic to the South and so forth. But he really teaches the Civil War as almost like a giant tragedy, right? Donald Kagan would teach the Peloponnesian War, that's Sparta and Athens, as like this thing we have to learn from, because this is what's happening in our lives. And it always caught me. I took his course when I was a junior, I think almost a senior. He's a brilliant guy, and he's considered maybe the best authority that speaks English on this subject. But I never liked this polemic approach to it. Now, what I want to get across to you today is, as you think about all the things that are going on in the United States, and at the end of this, I hope I can remember to come back and explain to you that the Ivy League is under attack by the Trump administration. And what I'm here to argue is this thing has gone around the horn. But let me start. I'm like really, Linda, I'm really giving you like behind the curtain of like why the Ivy League is what it is, why it's so important, why it's under attack, why it has all these issues right now. Okay, so let's all calm down. So first of all, you can look at my hat. The shield, the motto of Yale University is Lux et Veritas, light and truth. Harvard is just Veritas. And then I think this is Hebrew for the same, Lux et Veritas, but it's in Hebrew. One of the presidents of Yale University, I don't know if it was Timothy Dwight or one of those relatively famous New England Puritan guys, had a dream one night, and that in order to get into heaven, you had to speak Hebrew. And they'll just keep that in mind. Like, that's an unusual concept for a Christian. Remember, Christ didn't speak Hebrew, he spoke Aramaic. So why would these Christian ministers in New England have such a tight connection to Hebrew? Just hold the thought. right, so indulge me. I'm going to read this to you real fast. So this is by some famous minister from the First Church of New Haven. And if you don't know, they call it New Haven because the Puritans that were in Boston that created Harvard kicked out a bunch of radical Puritans who moved to New Haven because they were too radical for the Puritans. And remember, the Puritans were kicked out of Amsterdam because they were kicked out of England. They were sort of kicked out of everywhere. And we celebrate them, Thanksgiving and Ronald Reagan and the City on the Hill and, the whole mythology of like early America is built around Puritans and they're weirdos. Okay? But let's, instead of just calling them weirdos, let's actually read something. So here's the invocation. So you're sitting there with your mom and dad, right? You get into the hardest school in the world, in the country anyways, and like this is your introduction to this university. O God, beneath thy guiding hand our exiled fathers crossed the sea, and when they trod the wintry strand, with prayer and psalm they worshipped thee. Thou heardest well pleased the song, the prayer, thy blessing came, and still its par, it's probably how he says it, shall onward through the ages bear the memory of that holy hour. Laws, freedom, truth, and faith in God came with those exiled on the waves, and where their pilgrim feet have trod, the God they trusted guards their graves. And here thy name, O God of love, their children's children shall adore, till these eternal hills remove and spring adorns the earth no more. All right, here's the reason I read that to you. First of all, it's a very nice piece. It's a lovely piece. But notice the emphasis on exile. It's too, I know I'm losing some people here, but this is going to go on Substack for people who really like get my, the cut of my jib and enjoy this stuff. Exile is something that you frequently see in the Old Testament, right? The Israelites are in Babylon and they're given the Holy Land, and they go here, and Abraham goes here, and Esau goes there, and they're always moving around. They're getting chased, just like now. I mean, just like now, thousands of Israelis are trying to get off the coast into a boat and go to Cyprus. The moral of the story is exile and all this movement of Puritans leaving leaving Holland, which was known to be like very, very libertarian as it's known today. Like you go to Amsterdam because that activity can be done with, and you can pay for it. And also, illicit substances in the red light district. You get the joke. But these people wanted out of all that, right? They wanted to exile themselves. And for lack of a better term, let's just call this as like a kind of Zionism. You feeling me? All right. So then Donald Kagan gives his completely over-the-top speech. I didn't like the speech at the time. I didn't like him. I did take his Greek history course. It's very thorough, and he's a brilliant guy, and he's absolutely at the top of his game. I think he passed away just a few years ago. And then I can't even remember the words or the point or whatever, but I can sort of remember the vibe of the last speech about the Peloponnesian War. Okay, so this is Sparta versus Athens, and you should keep this in mind. That is one of the examples, like Rome and Carthage, and like what we're living through right now, is where you have a land-based empire and a naval-based empire. Okay, Athens was naval, Sparta was land. Okay? If you like 1984, Oceania is forever at war with Eurasia, just like we are right now. Right? Whenever you like turn on the television and see all this stuff go on, you can just go, Oceania is forever at war with Eurasia. And then you can turn on Rachel Maddow. She comes on at 8 or 9, I forget which, and you get the 3 minutes of hate. This is, I think, out of 1984, right? That's what's going on. So, but anyways, so you get this long, drawn-out, I think there was 3 sections of the Peloponnesian War, a lot like Rome fighting Carthage, and the last speech was like this sermon almost. I found it very odd. It's not the end of the world, but Professor Kagan was born with a birth defect and his eyes are slightly crossed. And it was just a sort of an unpleasant, like, dude, like, why are you shouting at me? Like, you felt like you were under attack. Like, you're not just being taught that this was a very important, one of the most important wars in Western history and all that stuff, but that this was something that was supposed to set in your soul, so to speak. You feeling me? Almost religious. Almost religious. Okay? So, when the War on Terror began, and 9/11 and all the infrastructure of 9/11 happened, and the people for the new American century, you heard that term float around, like the talk shows and so forth. And you heard of Paul Wolfowitz, and we got this new term, the neocons. Remember? Like, we had the first couple of years of the War on Terror, and we had all these new names of people that the Bush administration, H.W. Bush, Bush Sr., they called these people the crazies. So Donald Kagan's son is the co-founder of the People for the New American Century. So I want to talk to you about that. And the other co-founder was Bill Kristol, the guy who writes that really shitty little rag called The Weekly Standard, right? He's the guy you see on the talk shows. He really isn't that interesting. He doesn't really have, he's not very intellectual. The Weekly Standard isn't very good if you've ever read it. It's just like a rag, it's just like a neocon propaganda rag, okay? So these names started to fly around, and I would be like, I think I know Robert Kagan. Somehow it would come up Yale University and Robert Kagan, and I'd go, no, my professor was, I think, Donald Kagan. So it just floated around, you know what I mean? So then, once in a while, I would say about 10 years ago, not even, it was sort of dangerous to read this quote to you, okay, what I'm about to read to you. Now that all this has come out about Gaza, now since October 7th, there's all this stuff that's, I don't know how to say it, that it's been suppressed, and no one would really talk about it. I think even Joe Rogan talked about this a couple years ago, and I've known it for 20 years. And I've found the thing extremely disturbing, what I'm about to read to you. And the fact that it's attached to this what do you mean attached? Well, as I'm going to explain it to you right now, this whole Kagan, PNAC, People for the New American Century incubator thing was sort of incubated by Yale University and this powerful professor. You feeling me? Okay? Now, I'm going to go through this. And as getting out of bed this morning, I was like, I think I'm going to do this like Yale thing. Like, this is how you get this generated, people. This isn't like I like take a bunch of notes. Like, I have a cup of coffee and go, I think I'm going to do Yale and Donald Kagan. Okay? This is why you never see me look at notes. But I did use, more of like a quick reference, I did use Manus, and I said, could you give me, and I've read it before, I said, just give me the highlights, and I put it on Substack, I think for free, the highlights of this, the statement of principles for the People for the New American Century. Now, let's just review the old American century. I think we had a pretty good run of things in the 20th century. So I'm going to go through these bullet points. This was written June 3rd, 1997. Clinton was in office, right? Yeah. Clinton was in office. He's sort of winding down. I think the Monica Lewinsky thing had set in, and he was therefore compromised. We now know there's maybe a connection between that 20-year-old very wealthy girl from New England, from the East Coast, and Epstein. There's people talking about that. I don't know how they make the connection, and I don't want the live to get turned off, so I'm not going to do that. But you can have fun with that if you... But anyways, so Clinton's in office. I think the stock market was relatively high, It went to 10,000 late in the century, late in the 90s. So these guys come out and say, well, this is Clinton is liberal, like communist, and like the gaslight. I don't even know if it's gaslighting, but they wanted to take Clinton down. He wasn't aggressive enough, and as I would read through these bullet points, you'll see what I mean. Now, what I want you to think about while they're saying this is, at the same fucking time, we were running a budget surplus. In other words, okay, big strategic guy, let's talk about the strategic realities of running an empire. The two things you need are money, you need men and equipment and all that, and we have that in spades, right? But the two most draining, or the word's not coming to me, are our financial condition and energy. Adjusted for inflation, gasoline was cheaper in 1999 than at any point in U.S. history. My source on that's James Howard Kunstler. Think about that. Well, that can't be, because great-grandpa used to say it was 5 cents. Adjusted for inflation, the price of petroleum, the price of gas, was the cheapest ever as Clinton left the White House. And we were running a budget surplus. Okay? So that's the backdrop for these neocons to all get around and be like, Clinton's a big pussy. All right? This is their story, is that America's falling apart. He's not aggressive enough. We're not strong with our allies. Remember, Clinton ran the whole thing with Wesley Clark, and we ripped Yugoslavia apart and for some reason started a Muslim nation in the middle of the Balkans. Like, nobody really understands why we did that, right? It's weird, isn't it? Okay, so here's the core principles. American Globe. I won't be too like Tim Dillon with it, but American Global Leadership, the document advocates, this is Manas speaking, by the way, the document advocates for renewed American global leadership, asserting that it is beneficial for both America and the world, as though the United States wasn't leading the world in 1997. Strong military, emphasized the need for strong and modern military, advocating for a significant increased defense spending to meet present and future challenges. I think we were still spending 3% of GDP at the time. There was really nobody to challenge us in 1997. Strengthening alliances, we needed to stress the importance of strengthening our ties with our democratic allies and challenging regimes hostile to American interests and values. Like who? Who was like challenging America's values and interests in 1997? Accepting global responsibilities argues that the United States must accept its unique role in preserving and extending an international order friendly to the security, prosperity, and principles. Shaping the new century aims to ensure that the 21st century is favorable to the American principles and interests building upon past successes. Addressing threats highlights the need to address present threats, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so this is very much like what you get out of reading the Technological Republic today. The West is not backward, but like lazy. We've all become a bunch of pussies. The Silicon Valley needs to learn how to unalive people en masse. We need more killer bots. So really where we are today with the Technological Republic is right out of this from 1997. The thing that was in between is the War on Terror. Okay? And here's the signatories to the People for the New American Century. And as you read it, you're going to hear all these names that you've heard since 9/11 that are all over the news and the Pentagon and the back rooms and getting the money for the lobby and everything. Okay, Elliot Abrams, Gary Bauer, he's the weird evangelical guy. William Bennett's the guy that's gambled all his life, all his savings away and wrote a book on morality. Jeb Bush, Dick Cheney, Elliot Cohen, Midge Decter, Paula Dubriansky, Steve Forbes, Aaron Friedberg, Francis Fukuyama, who wrote the book about the end of history, Frank Gaffney, Fred Ickel, Donald Kagan, that's the professor, Zalmay Khalilzad, I think they had to get one Muslim in there, Lewis Libby, Norman Podhertz, Dan Quayle, Peter Rodman, Stefan Rosen, Henry Rowan, Donald Rumsfeld, Vin Weber, George Weigel, and Paul Wolfowitz. Okay, so it really is like the who's who. It really is the who's who of the war on terror. It's the people that all took over all the Sunday talk shows when the towers came down, right? And they knew just what to say. And Clinton fucked up, and we didn't chase Osama bin Laden, blah, 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 blah. Now, I typed into it and said, make an addendum that references the quote about bioweapons. I thought the quote about bioweapons was in the founding document. It was not. It was in a subsequent document written about a year later, I beg your pardon, in 2000, that contains this quote. Now listen to this very carefully. It's very much like the Technological Republic. Combat will likely take place in new dimensions, in space, cyberspace, and perhaps the world of microbes. Advanced forms of biological warfare that can, quote, target specific genotypes may transform biological warfare from the realm of terror to a politically useful tool. It's an argument for bioterrorism. In the document, signed by the fucking professor from Yale University named Donald Kagan. I don't know if he wrote that thing, but his signature is on the founding document to something like this. It isn't directly tied to Yale, but like, let's just do it again. I think about this probably once a week. This is like, what's your Roman Empire? I think about this like, you could take this to the ICJ and this is like what we did at Nuremberg, right? We went back into, Goering and this one and Goebbels, like all the bad guys, right? And said, well, you advocated for this and you advocated for that, right? Because like the mafia, it's hard to say that the guy that did this thing over here in this camp was ordered by this guy, right? It's hard to make those connections sometimes. This is staring us in the fucking face. Nobody in the media talks about it. Nobody in the Ivy League talks about it. Let's just read it again for fun. Combat will likely take place in new dimensions, in space, cyberspace. That's what we're dealing with right now. That's what Palantir is. And perhaps the world of by the way, one of the biggest investors, early investors in Palantir is Jeffrey Epstein. And the world of microbes, advanced forms of biological warfare that can, quote, target specific genotypes. It doesn't just say like we need like anthrax in case it really goes bad and we just have to kill everybody, right? He's making an argument for bioterrorism aimed at specific races. And his father introduced me to Yale fucking University, and my parents sitting beside me like just two nice little warm, fuzzy creatures from Western Pennsylvania. Spooky. So then I asked Manus, like, how does this relate to like the Geneva Convention? And it says, well, the statement suggests a consideration of advanced biological warfare as a potentially politically useful tool within the framework of future military strategy. The 1925 Geneva Protocol prohibits the use of biological weapons in warfare, and the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention, to which the United States is a signatory, goes further by prohibiting the development, production, acquisition, transfer, stockpiling, and use of biological and toxic weapons. It is the first multilateral disarmament treaty banning an entire fucking category of weapons of mass destruction. Stay with me. Okay, now we're going to go over to my next intern called Deep Seek. And I typed in, I'm just getting ready for this, like, putting Led Zeppelin on and like getting the light on and everything. And I was like, okay, I want to see what has Robert Kagan ever fucking done with his life. Now I'm sure he's brilliant. And so he grew up in New Haven because his dad taught there, graduated from Yale, attended Yale Law School, and then shifted to foreign policy work, otherwise known as schmoozing. He worked for George Shultz. He served as deputy for policy of the State Department's Bureau of Inter-American Affairs on Latin America. 1997, he worked with Bill Kristol to form PNAC. We just went through that. In 2000, just remember, this is 2000, he writes this thing, Rebuilding America's Defenses. And I think somewhere in that document it says that we need a new Pearl Harbor, which is, of course, is what 9/11 was. Called for increased military spending and regime change in Iraq, ideas later associated with the Bush Doctrine. So this is all before the Twin Towers come down. It's all laid out. The people are in place. Everybody, there's signatures. It was dissolved in 2006 because the Iraq War didn't go very well. He then works for the Carnegie Endowment. He becomes the co-founder of the Foreign Policy Initiative, another neocon think tank. They went out and got a bunch of money, and he started to do his thing again. Senior fellow at Brookings, columnist for the Post, writes A Twilight Struggle, American Power in Nicaragua, A Paradise of Power, America and Europe and the New World Order. This is how his father taught. Okay, this is like this real turgid language, like the return of history and the end of dreams, 2008. Like 2008. The war on terror is a complete fucking disaster by this point, right? Iraq is a disaster. Afghanistan's a disaster. Syria's, everything's a disaster. The economy of the United States is a disaster. Then the last book written in 2018 is called The Jungle Grows Back, America and Our Imperiled World. I don't know why I really should not laugh. Okay, there's it's just, we all know what Gaza is, okay? Okay, he advised John McCain. He was critical of Donald Trump's isolationism. And, quote, his wife, Victoria Nuland, served as Assistant Secretary of State of European Affairs under Obama and the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs under Biden. Now, what I just read to you, neither of these people is like the Secretary of State. They're just these back, shadowy fucking people getting money, going from think tank to think tank, sucking around the Ivy League and Washington and Brookings and cooking up the next fucking war for American soldiers to go die in. All of which are disasters, okay? Victoria Nuland teaches some sort of summer thing at Yale, and you follow me for, I love to play this out. It's like, Victoria Nuland, the distinguished practitioner of grand strategy. She's never done anything, right? These people don't do anything other than suck around, fuck around and find out and start wars. Okay? So Vicky is the one that flies during the Maidan massacre, where the people on the street said, there's somebody up there in the building shooting in both directions. What do you mean shooting? They're shooting at the Ukrainians and shooting at the police force trying to take on their provocateurs. She flies over with her neocon goons, John McCain, Lindsey Graham. There's a video, if you've never seen, of Lindsey Graham standing with John McCain talking to the Azov Brigade saying, we're going home to start the war to Washington, D.C. You lock and load, we'll go get the money. Lindsey Graham. Okay, so then as the thing in Ukraine is starting to sort of, hold on, I missed the point. So then there's like videos of her like passing out donuts, okay? 40 people were locked in a building and it was set on fire and they were like burned alive and stuff. Like, it just classic color revolution. Azov brigades, they have little funny squiggly lines like the Mustache Man people. In case you don't know Ukraine very well, the very western part is Catholic and is sort of like fascistic, and the rest of it's Orthodox and blah, blah, blah. I've spent a lot of time in here talking about all this. She gets in front of Congress, and I don't know who it was, says, like, Congress doesn't know what's going on in Ukraine, right? They just write the checks. They just have these votes and hundreds of billions of dollars disappear, just like we've seen for the last couple of years with Gaza and Ukraine. These are the people that run this shit. And somebody says to her, are there biolabs? Why do we keep hearing these reports of biolabs in Ukraine? And Vicky goes, there are bio research facilities, and we're very concerned Putin is going to attack them and potentially spread some terrible thing. Okay. Gorgeous use of gaslighting, right? We've put the bioweapons there in the most corrupt country in the world, which is now engaged in a civil war. But the real problem is Putin. Okay? Now, I just read to you the fact that they openly say the Geneva Convention and the 72 what's it called? They're openly, the reason they're in Ukraine is because she could be arrested and put in jail. Anybody involved with those bioweapons facilities in Ukraine, because America is run by these people, there's no accountability for anybody in this system. You just have these flaky people sucking around these different think tank things related to political parties and political candidates who need money from Miriam Adelson and so forth. The United States of America is completely out of fucking control. It's being run by a kind of mafia. And the reason Congress isn't in session is because it's so bad that Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna and a bunch of people actually have the votes to point to Trump and say, you're part of this conspiracy. This is why I'm wasting your Wednesday evening going through all this. I want to show you how like it really works. So now she's the Assistant Secretary of State. Now I want you to think about the Nuremberg trial. I want you to think about the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. So, like, there's real legal accountability when you have an office, okay? She's the Assistant Secretary of State. She knows that there's a Geneva Protocol. She knows that there's a 72 Biological Weapons Convention. And she purposely tried to skirt it by a coup in Ukraine. And with oligarchs and money from both the United States and Ukraine and probably Death Star, installed these bio research facilities. She could be taken to the ICJ and convicted like that. Our friends at Yale University know that. Our friends at Yale University know that Robert Kagan wrote that quote, the thing about the cyberspace and the biological warfare and specific genotypes. Okay, so let's just have a moment of rest and recuperation. This is going on Substack, of course, for free. So I will do a Q&A because I'm sure a lot of you are like, wow, like you like sort of like rub shoulders with these people. Yeah. Yep. Yep. But before I do that, I want to talk about what's happening now. So if you go back to my, see, a lot of stuff that I've put up on TikTok isn't getting a lot of traction. And you know what? I don't really care. Because if you really want to know what's going on right now, I'm not trying to get 1 million followers, okay? If you want, I did all these things this weekend, America's a Cult, and it's all about AI. And I know, it's like some of that shit you should watch once, and then you should come back to it next week and go, you'll see something else on TikTok or somewhere else or on TV or Sam Altman will get on CNBC or something and you'll hear something about and then you can go back and listen to these guys again and go like, oh yeah, they explained that. But let's just review what's happening in the Ivy League right now with Mr. Not Feynman, Finkelstein.
The whole assault on academic freedom didn't begin with Trump. It began with the Jewish supremacist billionaire class, people like Bill Ackman, Barry Sternlicht, Robert Kraft, Sheryl Sandberg wanted to crush the encampments. And they made it very clear that was their objective. By the way, Chuck Schumer went along with all of that. It was then acquiesced in by the Biden administration when the president of Harvard was ousted. The president of University of Pennsylvania was ousted. The president of Columbia was effectively ousted. Did you hear any denunciation about violations of academic freedom by the Biden administration? Was there any? I don't recall one word.
Now, we've gone round the horn, okay? I don't know if we want to do that. I don't think we can do it here on TikTok, but let's just say America, wasn't always an open society to minorities. Okay, religious minorities and racial minorities. A lot of people don't know that if you go back into these old schools leading up to the American Revolution, you were, how you're, like you go through graduation and frequently like the valedictorian is first or last. I forget how they do it, but you're all lined up according to your rank, right? You used to be in rank when you went into these schools based on who your family was. These were not democratic institutions by any stretch of the imagination. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, and they're not anymore either. But they try. They let a guy like me in whose parents didn't graduate from college, who grew up in a town of 4,000 people and raised sheep. Okay? And religious minorities and racial minorities were eventually like completely allowed into the academy. Let's just put it that way. But make no fucking mistake about what's going on here. What he just pointed out is this zealotry is a nice word. This zealotry of the neocons is now coming back to attack these academies. You feeling me? Like, it's not even hard to understand it. This Donald Kaganism, which his son inherited, and then his daughter-in-law inherited, and then her sister runs the Institute for the Study of War. If you've ever been on TikTok and you see there's 6 or 7 clowns on here that all keep telling you how Russia's imploding and Ukraine's going to win any minute, they're paid. They're propagandized. they don't institute for the study of war. And what they do is they go out and they get retired generals and they pay them $200,000 and you're going to come meet with us and eat steaks and nice glasses of scotch. You're going to go on MSNBC and meet the press and suck around Georgetown and tell these fucking stories about shit that makes no sense anywhere in the war on terror, except it sounds good on TV for people who don't know any better. And now they're coming after these universities themselves. The Trump administration has threatened Harvard, its endowment, its tax status. If you really look at America, people, like, I don't know if you really get the joke here, like, we don't really, like, if you go back to 1997 when this guy's like, Clinton has fucked everything up, we're weak, we're a bunch of pussies, smoking weed. It's like a Saturday Night Live skit, like, under the bridge, right? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, we were way more powerful in 1997 than we fucking are today. So what are they going to do? They're going to go after the universities. Alex Karp is talking about going after the universities, after the Silicon Valley, after anybody who resists them. And actually, as I sit here right now at 54 years old, I can actually, like, emotionally experience how Donald Kagan got us to this point. This kind of, like, propagandizing academia. This kind of, like, cartoonish thing where you talk about the Peloponnesian Wars like I'm talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 1970s. This kind of, like, cartoonish fantasy fucking world of what warfare is. These people have no... Victoria Nuland wouldn't know how to put a mag in an AR-15. This is who's running the fucking country. Have you ever noticed that all the people that have really actually been shot at... Have you ever noticed that all the people that have really actually been shot at are no longer in the Pentagon? There's all these clowns like Petraeus, and he challenges, like, his troops to, like, push up championships, like, in front of their parents and shit. This woman right here who wrote this fucking book, General Petraeus, challenged her to a push-up contest. That's who's been running the fucking U.S. military in the war on terror. These fucking clowns. Okay, let's go back to the one thing we have going for us is the price of oil and gasoline has been stabilized. To go back to the beginning when I started to talk about Clinton. We were running a fucking budget surplus when the people for the New American Century wrote that document. We are now headed to 7% deficits. FDR never ran a deficit more than 3%. We built the fucking Hoover Dam and put like 2 million people in the Civil Conservation Corps, and we never went over 3% of a deficit. We're now running 7% deficits just to keep the lights on and to keep the NASDAQ going up. And the darling of the NASDAQ is now Palantir. The whole system is going to be... Here's a question for you. I thought of this afternoon. Maybe Palantir is going to set the price of Palantir's stock. If Palantir is going to run the AI and the AI is doing the trading, maybe Palantir decides the price of its own stock. Nobody could sit down with a pen and paper and explain to you why Tesla is worth $1 trillion. There's no reasonable explanation for a company's earnings down 50% and its revenues down 20% and it's worth $1 trillion. It's worth 40% more than Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway. It makes fucking cars. Has a 7% net profit margin. The exact same as Ford and Toyota. It's worth $1 trillion. We are in La La Land, run by Silly people who read too many books and don't know how the fucking world works. They're literally in the Ivory Tower. And so you see even a guy who ran the war in Serbia, Wesley Clark. When you watch his like facial language, body language, when he talks about this, you can see he's disturbed, partly because of the conspiracy, partly because he knows that it won't work. He goes, yeah, there was a plan in the Pentagon to 3 days after 9/11 to attack 7 countries in 5 years. Yeah, that's these people. That's the people I just read to you. They had that mapped out since the 1990s. Now, what the fuck happened on 9/11? Who cares? It's like the grassy knoll and the left-handed shooter. Who cares? The silver magic bullet and all that shit. Who cares? But my concern, I just said this to my dad finishing up dinner. I was like, Dad, remember the Vietnam War, right? Like they pushed the helicopters into the ocean and shit like that. And like people, holding their babies, trying to get on the last helicopter out of the embassy and all that shit. If you've never seen it, it's horrific to watch. I think we're going to go through something like that to the 10th power. But Putin doesn't even take Trump's phone call anymore. China is sort of hinting at intervening in Gaza. There's this weird rumor that the Irish are going to intervene in Gaza, like militarily. That's just a rumor. If the Trump thing metastasizes into like super Watergate, and it'll mean that everybody involved, Kash Patel and his 25-year-old Israeli girlfriend, and Bondi, who doesn't know if the tapes are there or not, like everybody, and again, this is how all these people have set this up on purpose. They don't want any real constitutional government. They just want to suck around these different think tanks and get all these fucking wars. They have no idea how the wars are going to end or how to win the wars, right? They just have some sort of weird, I read too many books about the Peloponnesian Wars, and I think that we can win this if we can just get enough. Frankly, the word to use is conspiracy. That the way to perpetrate these wars is through conspiracy. And fine. Okay, so they just revised the labor thing down by 900,000 jobs. Yep, they did that twice before. Once in 2008 and once in 2000. How it gets so far off, nobody knows. Even the guys at All In podcast, the venture capital guys, were like, Chamat Palahapitiya is like, how the fuck do you miss 1 million jobs? So, I don't know when, probably maybe this weekend, I'm going to do another one of these about Harvard, and specifically about Alan Dershowitz. It's very, very similar. Okay? But in the meantime, I wanted you to see that when you watch these TV shows and you hear these experts and Brookings, and there's nothing behind these people. These people have nothing. There's just this giant pools of money creating. What would happen to Victoria Nuland if she was in Russia or China? I can tell you, she'd be in jail. Do you think they would let her, for a fucking second, have any control over anything? No, but Rachel Maddow comes on, says we have to hold him accountable. Putin doesn't like gay people. And millions and millions and millions of people are killed, maimed, and displaced over this silly shit. I don't even know who in the system makes any fucking sense. All right. We'll do Harvard. And then I think I'm going to do something this Sunday about Islam and Judaism, and it might be a little tough to hear, but let's do some Q&A stuff. Right, she's of Ukrainian descent as well, right? Her name's not Newland, her name's Noodleman. So, what did you think the US is going there? You need to go on Danny Jones and Rogan's podcast. I have to tell you that here's what I want to say. So I guess it was about a month ago, about 3 weeks ago, I'm doing a live on Sunday, and I just sort of drift into a conversation about the Prime Minister of Death Star and the ICJ, and the fact that, in my opinion, the ICJ is correct, and he should serve the term that is appropriate. Similar to the Nuremberg trials, similar to what happened in the South Africa, they had the Truth and Reconciliation trials. And as the name implies, it wasn't like we're going to machine gun everybody, but we're going to find out how this all really works. That's what America needs. So I put up these things, and I know you don't know what I'm talking about. You're like, what are you talking about, RICO? That's like for drug dealers and stuff. I'm telling you, people, these people need to be unpacked out of our system, either with the ICJ or with the RICO statutes or both. Palantir is one of their biggest investors is the Epstein estate. Now just sit and take that in for a minute. And they want you to believe that like China, Russia, and Iran don't want to go to war with. What the fuck would they want to go to war with us? The people that we have to work with are like in the Ivory Tower, in the think tanks, in the media, in the bureaucracy. So we all voted for this guy. Again, I'm going to reach back for one of my books. I like to do that. So this woman tells us, give them credit. MAGA's not going to let up on this. Right? So MAGA now includes, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and for a long time, Trump, said, I'm against Iraq. I think that was staged. Okay? I think Trump is staged. I think Trump is completely staged. I have to be careful so I don't get turned off. I mean, just think about when you're on here, all these code words we have to use. We can't even say like certain words. There's like 100 words you can't say on TikTok. And it's going to be taken over by an IDF officer. Like, what? I really want to, I'm going to do Q&A here in a minute. I really want to emphasize, though, that this is attached to these universities. Okay? These universities don't really have a way to police this stuff. I mean, what would you do if you were the president of Yale and you came out and said, on some Thursday afternoon, we want to disconnect ourselves from the people of the new American century and point out the bioweapons thing and the Geneva Convention or whatever. What would happen is 100 of their biggest fucking donors would call and say, you're gone, or I'm never. That's what just happened since October 7th. And then Trump gets in, right? He's going to go after the deep state, and he thinks the way he's going to do that is like to go after the Middle Eastern Studies Department at Columbia and Harvard, as they're the ones causing all the problems. Like, America has a lot of problems, but it's not like some like old Islamic studies guys in a fucking classroom somewhere. You know what I mean? This is how off track America. Off track. America's so off track it doesn't even know that it's off track, and it has no idea how the fuck to get back on. Sorry, that was all a long-winded way of saying I don't think Joe Rogan's going to be calling me anytime soon. I think Joe's a pretty good guy. I think he's very good at what he does. He reminds me of Johnny Carson. I've always been very, very skeptical of Tucker leaving Fox. I was like, guys, that's just a little too convenient, right? It's just like watching The Departed. Leonardo DiCaprio comes in and like, dude, you got 1,400 on your SATs. You're not going to be a statey. You're going to go undercover. That's who Tucker Carlson is, right? He puts his bow tie on. He goes on MSNBC, works with Rachel Maddow. Then he goes over to Fox News and becomes the biggest, right? The biggest voice of the left war machine. Then becomes the biggest voice of the right war machine. Then comes out of the war machine and pretends he's not part of the war machine. And then he does this never-ending drip of like, can you believe the CIA was involved in that? I think it's so obvious what's going on. And then, yeah, I didn't know my dad was in the CIA until he died. And then fucking Nick Fuentes is like, oh, no? How about this video from a year ago when you talked about it? That's how much smoke and mirrors we're in, people. We're in a really bad way for that reason. It would be like if you're working the corporate world or like at a bank or something like that, and your boss says, Susan, we need you to stay late tonight. And you go back in the conference room and they lock the conference room and everybody turns on their computers and go, we have no idea how these numbers work. That's where America is right now. You don't know whose fault it is. You don't know how it got this way. You don't know how you're going to put it back in fucking order. You can't not say something about it, and you can't hide it either. That's exactly where the Washington, D.C. is right now. If the attorney general doesn't know what to do, the guy fucking the Israeli girl doesn't know what to do, he was going to shut down the FBI and blah, blah, blah. He's doing nothing. Best case, that's a good thing to say. Best case scenario. Yeah, how's it any worse than when they assassinated Kennedy? That's a good question right there. Morpheus Met. That's one we need to dig into. So the night Kennedy was elected, they went to Nixon and said, we could probably contest the election. We could probably point to Chicago and we could infer election interference and tie it to organized crime. I think I'm right about that. I think the movie with Anthony Hopkins points that out. Or I read it somewhere, I forget which. Nixon said, no, we can't do that. I mean, you get warm and fuzzy on you, but like Nixon said no that time. And then if you watch the movie, yeah, it's the one Anthony Hopkins movie. And they come to him and Alexander Haig comes to him and says, we still have the military, meaning we could push the military into these other, the Department of Justice, or I don't know, take over the Supreme Court or something like that. And Nixon goes, no, I'm not going to do that. All right, I'm going to play by the rules. I'm going to do what's best for America. I would say that 99% of the population, when Malcolm X, stuck his foot up his ass whenever he said the chickens are coming home to roost. Remember that? But most people were just aghast at what happened and massively patriotic. Remember, all men went through the draft back then, right? We don't have any of that, people. We don't have any of that. If something bad happens, we're already all half cocked. And I don't think it's like before the election, where one half of the nation sat and looked at the other one and said, "You're the problem." I think that's what's changed. Everybody's going, Jesus Christ, it really is the deep state, and Trump isn't the answer. He's part of it. That's my point to you. It isn't like, price of oil is reasonable, like interest rates at 5% are not the end of the world. Like, we need 10 million houses. We could just go build 10 million houses. It's not that hard. But it's this gnawing destruction of not just confidence, but of the system can't solve the problem for wickedness. And people operating in the shadows, and people operating, and Mickey Mouse people having so much sway over our system. Little boys who grew up playing too many, army men, and then ended up with too much money and too much power because their father was a professor at Yale. So they get together with other boys that played with too many fucking army men and have too many weird ideas about what happened in 70 AD and blah, 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 and Ukraine, and basically get control of not, what is the deep state? There isn't like a building with people in the basement called the deep state. It's this inner network of all of these major institutions. And they're all profoundly corrupt. Everywhere you look, from finance to the military to corporations to the biggest healthcare company in the country, United Healthcare Group, just says, fuck it, we're not paying 32% of the claims. Like, as soon as you hear that, this is a company with like $600 billion in revenue. It's like almost as big as Walmart, right? In other words, it's not that they didn't pay it's not that they denied services. In other words, you don't need your appendix out. You're fine. You have to go home and take an antacid. You're okay. That's not what happened. They took the guy's appendix out. The doctor did the surgery. The surgery center billed United Healthcare Group, and they told him to get fucked. The corruption in our system is like the Soviet Union. So, okay, what's the way out? So, of all the things I've read, okay, right there's the answer there, Morpheus Matt. Of all the things that I've read through all this, I talk about crypto and finance and this and AI and whatever. The fourth turning narrative is a very powerful one. And let me show you how that's already working. Okay, if you don't know, so there's an 80-year cycle, and there's roughly 4 or 5 generations. And if I remember right, the 4 generations are, this is a cycle. It just goes round the horn from century to century. So right now, the baby boomers are the prophets. All the baby boomer politicians all talk alike. Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, by the way, they're very, very good friends. Joe Biden, all of them, all have this, like, I was born in Scranton, I was raised by Puerto Ricans. Like, they all have this, like, bombastic way of speaking. And, like, Hillary Clinton's, we saw, like, they don't have any, like, self-reflection of how absolutely ridiculous. They do think that they're prophets. They're like people who run a cult. Then you have Gen X. And we like grew up and we were like, it's sort of like the world's run by people who run cults, right? But we don't really know what to do about it, so we're the nomads. Millennials are the heroes. Like, they're willing to take on the world. They're willing to walk into their boss's office on any Thursday afternoon and say, get fucked, I'm leaving. They have no... People have called them out about this all the time. And the people who wrote that book said that's what their generation is going to be. And it's primarily negative. I don't know exactly how old Nick Fuentes is, but he's just like basically saying, fuck the whole thing. He doesn't really even have like a pot, but that's the point of the book, The Fourth Turning, is at some point it just becomes all destruction. Everybody's just out to just wipe out what came before. Gen Z, people in their 20s and early 30s, are the creatives, are the artists, are the people who are going to rebuild. Now hold the thought. Baby boomers spend $30 billion on alcohol a year in the United States. Gen X spends $30 billion a year on alcohol in the United States. Millennials spend $30 billion a year on alcohol in the United States. You know how much Gen Z spends? 3. They're already seeing like how severe the problems really are. For one, they don't have any money to go out and go to a club and buy one $9 beer after another, or one $15 drink after another. And if you look at all this tech, all this AI and crypto and stuff, you know, the people who are really building there, they don't even like lay awake at night and like say JP Morgan sucks. They just, well, it's what it is, and if it lives, it lives. If it dies, it dies, but we're going to build something else. So it's already started. Like, I think the thing I'd point to is Nick Fuentes, who I think is substantially younger than not Elon Musk. Tucker's my age. He's Gen X. And he's just pointing to him and say, you sold out. You're a sellout. You're a fucking sellout. Nobody should trust anything you say. And he's right. And that's what has to happen. The baby boomers have to be completely wiped out. J.D. Vance is going to be brought in as like this millennial revolution to be completely wiped out. J.D. Vance is going to be brought in as like this millennial revolutionary guy. He's completely bought and sold by Peter Thiel. There's this horrible thing. Again, Peter Thiel had a lover 20 years younger, fell off the balcony. Nobody knows why. You know, just everywhere you look, it's like that. So, I mean, to me, if there's a barn that's going to burn down, the first thing to do is get away from the barn. Don't sit around and talk about who set the barn on fire. Don't argue about which way it's going to fall. Don't try to roast a marshmallow. Get the fuck away from the barn. And I've actually been thinking recently, like the student loan thing just went from like delinquency of like 4 or 5% to like 18%. A lot like very, very similar to subprime mortgages. And if you think of what a student loan really is, it's a subprime mortgage. It's a subprime personal loan. It's to lend money to someone 18 or 19 years old who doesn't have a job, doesn't have a career path. Just like, remember the mortgages were lent to people that didn't have, they called them no income, no ninja. No income, no something or other. Student loans are, for college, are effectively like subprime mortgages. And they just exploded. I can remember, I'll tell you the story and then I'm going to stop. I don't talk about this very much, and I probably should. 2008, I met with the head of private client group at the nice brokerage firm. I made a nice living, lived in a small town, had 5 kids and a big, beautiful house and nice cars and the whole thing. And you can tell my personality because I do this stuff. I was starting to study what was going on, and I was like, this is going to blow up. And I had a real big month in January. I'll make this short. And the head of private client group came through our little branch and put this nice little note and congratulations and and way to go. Let's start off the year and like Glengarry Glen Ross stuff. So I called him, but I was gone because my grandmother had passed away. So about a week later, I emailed him and I said, thanks for the kind words and if you're back in town, I'd like to break bread with you. So we did that, and I sat down with him and I said, it's coming, don't you? I'm not making this up. This was either late March or early April of 2008. And what you could see is you could see a little bit of the problem everywhere. I went to see my doctor. And of course, when you're a stockbroker, everybody wants a stock tip. They want to talk about stocks and ad nauseum. And I said, I don't think everything's what it appears to be. And he's taking my blood pressure or something. And he said, why? What do you think? And I said, well, you prescribe antibiotics, right? He said, yeah. And I said, well, imagine if they wanted to get rid of all the earaches for kids, so they started to put antibiotics in the water. And he was pumping the little ball on the thing and stopped and looked up at me and he said, that bad? I said, yeah, that bad. So it's August or September. Page 3 of the Financial Times that comes out shows a little graph that looks like this, just like the one that just came out for student loans. I think I have it from Zero Hedge from a paywall. I looked at it last night. But anyways, I looked at it last night. But anyways, the delinquencies, car loans go, have a cycle to the delinquencies. Mortgages are pretty predictable. And the student loan thing just goes like this. It goes from 4% to 18. It's the exact same fucking graph as subprime in July and August of 2008. And it's $2 trillion. It's the same number as subprime. Subprime was about $1 trillion. And so to the layperson, you start to hear people on CNBC get a little queasy, and then in the system, the traders start to attenuate for risk. Okay, so this is what makes market-based systems so efficient. The scary part is our market-based systems are now being run by AI. But anyways, so federally backed Fannie Mae, and specifically federally backed mortgages just started to trade not for 100 or par. They just started to slip. They were just trading 96. And everybody's like, what's up with Fannie Mae? Has the implied, not the full backing, but the implied. Ginnie Mae, Government National Mortgage Association, has the full faith and credit of the federal government. Fannie Mae does not. So these bonds start trading like old ladies and old hunky guys, the steel workers and shit, start to call you and be like, Jimmy, why does my Fannie Mae say 96 instead of 100? Okay? So one night at 4 o'clock, they have a conference call, a squawk box, there's a little box on your desk, and they have a guy in Philadelphia who gets on and explains why all the Fannie Mae's are trading. And I think at this point there was some trading at some that had exposure to certain places, maybe Florida or something like that were seen as a little bit more dangerous, We're trading like 93, 90. So they got on and they gave this thing that there's no way that this could go wrong. The long-term mortgage delinquencies and default rates are less than 1%. There's no way that this is real. So people start to, like, the brokers are sitting there after hours. You get the joke here. It's like 5:45, 6:15. Some guys are big bond guys, right? They have all these little old ladies. They have insurance companies, and they have all these, like, tens of millions of dollars in Fannie Mae that just lost, like, its ass in a month. No, there's no problem. It's impossible that there's a problem. It's inconceivable. So then I don't know if it was me or somebody else said, well, we do have a problem because our clients are asking us why this is happening, and you haven't given us an answer. I think it was me, because that's how I roll. And they had this 27-year-old, okay? I think he still works for the firm. And he gets, I'm not making this up. You think this bullshit about Robert Kagan and so forth is bizarre. He gets on and he says, I used to run a bank. And he's 27. And I can tell you, there's no way that anything could go wrong with this. It's right out of one of these movies, one of these Big Short movies. So the thing winds down, and they give us, we have the guys' emails that spoke, the traders and the this one and the that one, the interest rate guy who can, read the tea leaves of the Fed and all this bullshit. So I sent an email to this 27-year-old and said, I have on my desk the Financial Times with the chart that shows that we just hit 19% beyond 90 days default. It's not default, but it's 90 days is the magic number of most defaults, auto loans, mortgages, and so forth. And I think it had just 18% had just gone 60 days or 90 days. I think it was 60 days because 90 days would be default, but it was like tick tock, right? And he calls me and he said, do you know who I am? I said, yeah, I know who you are. He said, I used to run a bank. Cool. So he reiterated the same stuff. So before I leave, I sit down on my email and I email him back and I CC'd the fucking private client group and I said, what is the name of the bank that you used to run? He was an intern to the head of credit or something. But I just know that these big institutions can lock and load on all these fucking clowns because at the end of the day, all they're trying to do is hold up the facade. As soon as the facade breaks, I would say, I just saw last night, somebody said down on the QT that in the mortgage business there's something called a special servicer who services things that are in default. He said one of the largest, top 3 or 4 banks just reached out to me to start to prepare for the defaults. 17.9 million. Now that's a number, but it could be wrong. But there's $2 trillion worth of student loans, and it just went from 4% to 18%. In other words, there's people that are just saying, fuck it. And that's my point to you, when people say fuck it, it's just not a mathematical thing. This is my whole point going on for 2 hours about this. It's when the dam finally breaks, it's not the numbers. It's not because Palantir is 500 times earnings. It's people go what even is Palantir? What even is AI? Is it just all to mind fuck us? and I was thinking about doing a top 10. and I was thinking about doing like a top 10 for people like millennials and Gen Z of like real world reality of what you should do. Well, one of them is if you have like over $100,000 in student loans that you can't possibly support, you should leave the country. There's no other reasonable explanation of what to do. And that's what's going to happen. All of these people, I think primarily young people, I think people from 20 to 40 are like, have been hanging on, right? We're going to get Trump, or the war is going to die down, or I don't know, whatever. It's like just the media flow, right? The tariffs, and then the tariffs are going to be solved, and then we've like lived like this for 25 years. Everything is like a constant, like triggering trauma bond thing, and I think at some point, again, I'm going to hold up this book. I think at some point the cult breaks. And it isn't going to be about $1 trillion in mortgages. It's going to be about $100 trillion in debt. And 40% of the fucking population says, I'm not paying my taxes. I'm not paying my health care. I'm not paying fucking anything. And it could be something to do with Trump. It could be, I don't know, Gaza. It could be, it could be that moment like when Jim Cramer, just to add that to the 2008 story. You remember the Jim Cramer, they know nothing, they know nothing? No one ever called me and said, what do you mean there's something wrong? No one ever, after that they were like, what do we do about it? That was the thing that just somehow snapped everybody's psychology, and then everybody was like, how bad is it, and what do we do about it, right? So lastly, on the stock market in 2008, you can go back and look. Banks started to sell off. Risky tech things had already blown up 6-7 years earlier. So everybody piled into the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Well, everybody's piling in to 7 tech companies right now. It's the worst it's ever been. Here's the top thing. Bubble warnings flashing for tech. Risk highest since the bursting of the dot-com bubble. I have the premium, so I think it's going to let me open this. And I can't give away things for free. There it is right there. Concentration within the S&P 500 has surged to the highest level in decades. 2000, it was the market cap of the 10 largest company in the S&P 500 was 27%. It's now 33%. The earnings of the S&P 500, 25% of it comes from the 10 largest companies. PE multiples, tech forward PE multiples are at an all-time high, higher than 2000. They just broke above 2000 at 26 times earnings. I'm just reading these for the first time. It's not appropriate that I read the whole article to you, but I can just give you the highlights. Tech, media, and telecom market cap as a percent of the S&P in 2000 was 44.2%. It's now exactly there. Oops. There's one last graph. TMT, which is points out that the TMT group's multiple is even more unreasonable historically when mega cap. Okay, so if you remove Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Apple, and Meta, the PE for that sector is at 24.4, and that's the highest it's ever been. All the graphs are in complete lunar landscape. And I guess the last thing I would say is the reason is people believe it's going to work is because it has to work. If the NASDAQ were to turn down, the fucking economy would just, they call it the K economy. It's like Panera and above is doing well, Panera and below is doing bad. So like the top 5% of the population, everything's fine. They're buying the next Volvo, going on vacation, kids are getting into school, blah, blah, blah. They're not borrowing a lot of money. Da, da, da. So there's like, I don't know, 5, 3, 10% of the population up here, and the rest of it's like this. And the NASDAQ is what feeds that. It's not an industrial economy where like whatever's good for GM is good for everybody, right? The engineers make more money, the labor makes more money, the people that make the tires make more money, the truckers make more money, the whole thing's connected by an industry, right? Everybody has to participate in the industry. This isn't how this works anymore. The whole fucking NASDAQ is going to be run on AI. It's just a world unto itself. It's an ivory tower. Have a nice night.